All right, welcome guys. We still have some people trickling in, so I'll keep my eye on that and make sure everybody gets let into tonight's show. And I would like to welcome all of you. I know we have a few people who are joining us for the first time this week, and it is a pleasure to have you guys here. Welcome to Talk, Taste, and Travel. This is where myself, Kristen Sandvig, and Adele Corrigan, the general manager of 13 Celsius, take you guys on journeys around the world to explore different destinations through the lens of wine. And we are super excited because we have tons of new things to share with you guys this week. And we are incredibly grateful and incredibly thankful for all of you guys who have participated with us since the very beginning. And with that, let's get started. Tonight we are off to Slovenia, Hungary, and Serbia. And if you read the emails that we've sent out, these wines aren't New World or Old World, they're Ancient World. So lots of the grapes we'll be discussing tonight are grapes you've probably never heard of. These regions are probably really new, and they might be some of the first wines you've ever tried from those regions. I do want to thank our producers for tonight's show. We have several people who have contributed to our show, and we just wanted to take a moment to thank a few of these people publicly. There are a number of people who also contributed who have chosen to remain anonymous or didn't see my request to thank them publicly just yet, so we might be thanking a few more people in the upcoming shows, but specifically Kate Wilson, Ken and Gretchen Reddy, Louis Riccadello, Mary and Doug Sandvig, Margot Getty, and Bill and Lynn Schreiber. Thank you guys for being producers for Talk, Taste, and Travel. And with that, let's get into Eastern Europe. Today, we are journeying back in time, and we're going through some of the most underrated wine regions of Europe. And that journey begins in Ljubljana, which is the capital city of Slovenia. The entire country is about the size of Massachusetts, and this is a perfect place to base while exploring surrounding areas, whether it's by car or train. From there, we'll head to Budapest by train before we dive into the rich history of Tokai, and we could spend a week in Budapest alone. It's such a dynamic and interesting city, but today we'll touch on the highlights and then visit the countryside and some lesser visited areas of Hungary. Then our last stop this week takes us to Serbia, where we'll begin our journey in the energetic city of Belgrade. And it was heavily bombed in the 90s, but the city and country is emerging from its complicated past or complicated recent history, and it's becoming one of the liveliest places to be for food and wine and nightlife and the outdoors. So with that, Adele, why don't you unmute yourself and give us a little bit of an introduction into today's wines before we really get into things. And I'm going to see if I can make this full screen for y'all.
All right, so we've got three very different wines tonight, and we're going to be talking about them in reverse order from what we normally do. When we usually will start with like a white or a sparkling, and then do a rosé and then maybe a red. We're actually going to do these in reverse, but don't fret. You're going to be just fine. Whether you want to get a fresh glass between the white, the red, and back and forth. Something that like us wine professionals do, we call it like a rinse. And basically, like if we have a red in our glass and we finish it and there might be just like a little like residue on the glass, we'll just take the next wine, and if it's a white, put like a small little splash in the glass, swirl it around real good, and either dump it out or just drink it. But then your glass is kind of primed to go back to white wine, and then you don't have to do all the dishes at the end of the night. But we'll start with the Pinot Noir, which feel free to go ahead and give this one pop it open and start drinking it as we go in. And then after that, we'll go into the Kirajvar from Hungary. And then lastly, Bokezki from Serbia. I'm going to embarrass myself the entire episode because the pronunciation of these is very difficult and I have not practiced enough. So bear with me. Kristen, you got to unmute yourself.
Of course I do. So let's familiarize ourselves a little bit with the destination. We're exploring Eastern Europe tonight, and today's itineraries will kind of give an overview of what it would be like to spend 11 nights in Slovenia, 9 nights in Hungary, and 6 nights in Serbia. And these are just recommendations, but you really could combine all of these countries and base yourself from the major hubs of each country and connect them in a single itinerary if time allows it. That being said, Adele mentioned that many of the wines we're tasting tonight have really unusual pronunciations, and we may have never heard of them before. Adele, tell us a little bit about why these grapes are so unfamiliar to us.
A lot of these wines are just not really available in the markets, or they are in very limited quantities. But this area of the world used to have a very rich and vast history of viticulture. But it mostly was the fact that it used to be Yugoslavia, or in Hungary's case, it used to be part of, the Iron Curtain kind of drew a line, and it was that side of communist Russia. And that Iron Curtain was a very, very strong border that anything west of that was just not allowed to come in, or you couldn't really put anything out. And it's crazy to think about when you see some of the pictures of these cities, because they were, and they used to be, huge art and cultural epicenters. And, Budapest in Hungary has boulevards just like they do in Paris, and huge buildings, but it was that communist control that really put everything on a hold until the it lasted into the 80s, and then in the 90s, things are starting to come back. But if you think about it, since the 90s is really when quality viticulture has come back about. So that's why we haven't really seen a lot of these wines, but I definitely think that these are going to be hidden gems and things that people are going to see more of soon, hopefully, and could be sort of like an untapped resource for really good quality wines.
Yeah, it's crazy that the 90s weren't really that long ago. And in the grand scheme of things, these are really new destinations to visit, especially when it comes to their emerging wine or re-emerging wine and culinary scenes. So with that, let's jump into Slovenia. This is the first country that we're visiting today, and its breathtaking natural scenery, vibrant capital, and up-and-coming food scene really make it a traveler's dream destination. It's often overlooked because it's right in between Italy and Croatia, which are 2 of the most popular countries to visit in Europe right now. But it might surprise you guys to learn that you can actually drive from Venice to Slovenia in just 2 hours. So this is a really easy destination to combine with either of those big bucket list countries. It's also one of the safest countries in the world. As somebody who did a ton of solo traveling in my early 20s, I was always looking for places that it was really easy and safe to visit as a young woman. And this country is ranked 8th on the Global Peace Index. And it's also really a great option for a family where you don't necessarily have to micromanage your kids. You can be comfortable, they're going to be okay. And as one of the less touristy countries in Europe, it's going to be an excellent option post-pandemic for travel for visitors who need that European fix, but also want to avoid some of the more crowded sites and cities. Its dedication to sustainability is something that I think is just really fantastic, and it really stands out among other countries in the world. A third of the country's land is protected, and it is the 3rd most forest-covered country in Europe. Traveling through Slovenia can kind of feel like you're moving through a fairy tale. You have these beautiful mountains that are covered in green, and you've got the dramatic turquoise rivers that cut through the valleys, and then you've got the calm still waters of Lake Bled and Lake Bohinj, and they just reflect the surrounding scenery and the castles, and it's truly a photographer's dream. And then today we'll end on the southwest coast, which is home to some of the really popular towns on the Adriatic Sea and some of the really beautiful vineyards that we'll get to explore later today to the west. And then you have the Julian Alps to the east. So let's talk about where to stay when we're visiting Ljubljana. Some of the best hotels in the country are the Intercontinental Hotel Ljubljana, which is a city that I'm never gonna. It's never just gonna roll off the tongue for me. So bear with me. But it is it's one of the finest hotels in the capital, and it's really easy walking distance to the train station, to the old town. It has really chic dining establishments, bars that cater to business gatherings and social rendezvous, and the cuisine at the Rooftop B restaurant has this open kitchen concept, which gives guests a peek into its culinary masterpieces. And all of this is complemented with amazing Slovenian wine. The Grand Hotel Union is another historic building that was constructed in 1905, and it is a true complement to secession architecture of Slovenia. It's a 4-star hotel, and it is in the historical city center. It's been visited by many distinguished figures from world politics, film, music, royalty, and the Queen has even stayed there. Then we have Hotel Cubo, and this hotel's only been open for 5 years, but it's already become a favorite in the city. While most hotels like to play big, this property really takes the privacy of its guests into consideration. And service comes first. They really try to make everybody feel like they're visiting their own homes. And this building was actually it's another historic building, but it was renovated and turned into a hotel. And it's an important cultural heritage mark of Slovenia. And so with that, now that we've checked into our hotels, let's get sightseeing. One of the coolest things about Slovenia is you really can base in the capital city and take day trips everywhere. The entire country is about the size of Massachusetts. So for us Texans, that is super easy to drive through. Like an hour and a half, 2 hours, that's no time at all. Some of the highlights of Ljubljana on day one, there are 17 bridges. Explore the city's waterfront. Take a tour of one of the most famous architects' homes. You can ride the funicular up to Ljubljana Castle for the best views of the city, or wake up early to beat the crowds of the old town. The Logar Valley is another highlight of visiting Slovenia. You can drive the Solkava panoramic road for the best views, visit the Rinka Center in the main town to get a trail map, and you can take on lots of the hikes in the area. This is a great place to dine at a local farm, but reservations are highly recommended in advance. If you have ever Googled Slovenia or you know anything about it at all, you probably came across it because of an image you saw of Lake Bled. And this is one of the most touristy parts of the country, but it's touristy for a reason. It's absolutely beautiful. It's worth spending at least 2 nights here. You can walk or bike the shores of either of the lakes. You can visit Bled Castle and order the famous Bled cake, or take a Plenta boat out on the lake and visit Bled Island. Then moving forward, the Kronsiaka Gora is the perfect place to drive up through the Vršič Pass. And this is the highest mountain pass in Slovenia. You can spend a sunny day on Lake Jansa, visit Zelenici Natural Reserve for the beautiful scenery and some bird watching, and then hike in one of my bucket list items, Triglav National Park. Then from there, we'll head to the Soka Valley, explore some of the little towns. You can make reservations in advance to visit a famous Michelin-starred restaurant. Visit some of the museums in the area. The Kobarid Museum is one of the largest battles in World War One history. It explores the history of one of the largest battles in World War One, and it really dives into how the country's history was shaped by it. You can hike this stunning Tolman Gorge to Slap Kozjak and visit this gorgeous waterfall. Then moving from there, you can go to Gorsica Bruda, begin your journey into Slovenian wine country with some of the more well-known wineries. And then we'll head to the coast after that and visit Istria and the Mediterranean. You can take a train through the oldest cave railway in the world to see stalagmites and stalactites of the Postojna cave, enjoy the medieval towns of Piran and Koper, and then relax on the coast to learn more about the fishing traditions. If you have known me for a while, you might know that I love riding horses. I grew up riding horses, and I loved seeing the Lipizzaner stallions when they would go on tour as a kid. And so if you have any interest in that, it's like horses dancing, and it's really not that cheesy. It's super cool. But this is where you can actually see the oldest stable with the white Lipizzaner horses and treat yourself to a show at the classical riding school. So with that, let's dive into wine country. Adele, tell us what is important about Slovenian wine and what we really need to know before we open up this bottle and get drinking.
So here we are in Slovenia, and I think it's just important to remember when it comes to wine again is that Slovenia didn't become independent until 1991. It was one of the first countries to emerge fully from Yugoslavia and establish like a successful wine industry, but everything is fairly new. My first introduction to Slovenian wine definitely kind of followed on like the footsteps of when I was getting into Northern Italian wine, specifically the wines from Friuli, because they kind of shared the border. They're right there in Italy, you know, on the far east, and then some of the wine regions in Slovenia are just right there. I mean, it's common that during some tastings and some studying that producers might even have lands that cross the Italian-Slovenian border, or vineyards and stuff like that that were between the two. So Slovenian wine's not too over out there in the middle of nowhere. There have been some really good quality wines here, and some of the grapes are a little bit confusing because they have Slovenian names for them, but main ones to know: Rafosco, which they call Rafosk, Ribolla, which they call Rebula, which is a cool white wine, and then you'll find some international varieties like the ones that we're trying today, like Cab, Merlot, and then Pinot we have. But as you're traveling through the region, if you start in the east, you've got the green region there, which is I'm going to say this wrong. Podrave, it's one of the largest regions, and it's definitely known for kind of bulk wines, mediocre, not too high quality. But what's interesting about that one region, if you are visiting in that green section, is that one of the oldest vines in the entire world exists there. It's over 400 years old. So if you're going on a wine historical landmark, you want to go visit one of the oldest vines ever, that exists there. And then in the blue section, in I'm going to say it wrong again. We'll just leave it in the blue section. And this is good for sort of white wines and kind of borders kind of where Croatia is over there. Not really going to see too much coming out of there, but the most important is definitely where the pink and the orange and the red regions are there close on the western side of Slovenia. That's where we're going to find the region of mostly Primorska, and this is home for like the best quality wines that you're going to find for sure. So now that we kind of have like an overview of like wine country, there we are. There's our next wine. So here we are, all the way onto the coast, and this is in eastern Slovenia, and this is our first wine that we're going to taste today. So if you haven't opened it up already, here is the Pinot Noir, and I have it right here. And it's cool because they label it as Pinot Noir. Not a lot of places and countries that we've explored in the past have labeled it varietally. So that's always helpful, especially when most of the other grapes from Slovenia are strange names from strange places. You don't know where the name is, you don't know what the grape is.
Yeah, I think it's really awesome that they actually did name it that way, because I think Slovenian wine could be something that might be a little unapproachable just because of the tough pronunciation. I mean, you can see just us not being super familiar with all of the characters and what specific sounds they make, how that can be kind of scary to read. And just by labeling it Pinot Noir, if you saw this on the shelf, you would be so much more inclined to pick it up than you would if it was labeled in the local language. And I think one thing I do want to touch on that is important, and this is a good example of that, they speak English widely in Slovenia. So while many of these words look really intimidating, the chances of you visiting the country and interacting with an English speaker are really high. So just something I wanted to note. And back to you, Adele.
That is good to know, because that's always like a good, like, okay, because yes, I'll see like the pronunciation. So Istria is where this one is from, and this is in the far northwestern sort of part. Slovenia only has like this much land that actually touches water. Otherwise, it's pretty well landlocked. So this wine is actually from that small stretch that has its own water access. Another cool part about Slovenia is that they kind of share the city of Trieste, which is technically in Italy, but they use that also as like a port city that's kind of shared, and there's lots of like cultural interminglings there of like Italian and Slovenian. But this is Vinokultur, and it's a pretty cool wine project that I came across. They have a couple different varieties here in town. This is their 2013 Pinot Noir. I popped it open. I think it needs a little bit of time to air, but it's like a very more tart expression of Pinot Noir. It's definitely earthy for sure. I definitely think that this wine has like that typical Pinot characteristic where it's got bright, very tart cherries and cranberries to it. I think that this wine could age for just a little bit longer as well. And let's see.
And that's pretty interesting too, considering the vintage that it is. So even being a 2013, this is not necessarily a wine that's meant to be drunk while it's young. It's something to sit on for a while, and you can let the wine change and grow and evolve in the bottle before it really comes to maturity, right?
Yeah, and the vineyards here, I mean, they're on the rolling hills. They overlook the sea, and they're very sunny. This producer tries to keep the tradition of winemaking as simple and as old school as possible. So you're not going to find a lot of new oak on this wine. And it just has that sort of sense of Istrian soil, like that little bit of that terroir. I think that this wine is something that could pair well with all sorts of different cuisines because it has really high acid to it. What do you think, Kristen?
I think it could. It makes me want some dumplings with a little bit of citrus, a little bit of soy. What do you think?
Yeah, that's something that we kind of talked about beforehand, like what would we eat with this wine? And although there's a serious lack of any Eastern European restaurants in Houston that I try to Google search for, most places just are like maybe influenced by a couple dishes, but there's no like hardcore Eastern European food places. So an alternative, something that we do have a really good sense of culture here in Houston is our Chinatown or Asia Town, and just picking up some dumplings and things that aren't too spicy. You definitely want something that's like on like the milder Asian side of things, would be a really fun idea for dinner tonight. So if you have Favor on your phone or DoorDash or whatever, you know, maybe check out one of those little places in town and get some noodles and some dumplings.
Adele, I have a question. Well, first note, I think this is a really good idea as far as a food pairing, because everybody can order takeout anywhere, even if they're joining us not from Houston tonight. But What do you think of Riel as a representation of Eastern European food with like Ukrainian influences and Russian influences? Do you think that would be a restaurant where you would find wines like this?
Maybe. I mean, I've only been to Real like twice, and I know that they're more on like the Canadian influence, but
Okay.
as one who's my dad's side is from Canada, and like I grew up going to Edmonton, and my grandmother is Ukrainian, so like having pierogies and stuff like that was common, and these little sticky pork rib things. And I know that they have the pierogies over at Real. I thought it was more of a Canadian influence, French Canadian than Eastern European, but I
All
don't know.
right.
Like someone said, Cafe Adele. Is that my name? Do they have my name in a
Is that a real place?
comment? A comment from Mary. Cafe Adele, great for Bosnian out in West Houston.
Nice.
Cool, because you never see my name anywhere. That's awesome. Well, this is making me hungry. Speaking of hungry.
Speaking of Hungary, let's do it. So Hungary's the next stop on our itinerary tonight. And most people think of Budapest when they think of Hungary. It's really become a favorite for travelers looking for everything from a romantic getaway to weekend vacations and the parties. But there's so much more to the country than just Budapest alone. In 1949, after World War II, Hungary was ruled by communism. And we talked about the Iron Curtain falling a little bit earlier. But as you stroll through the streets, you can still experience remains of the regime and its mark on local history. As the years progress, more and more travelers realize that Hungary is a country that's home to rich culture, delicious food, beautiful scenery, and some of the best and most picturesque Christmas markets in the world. The seasonal attractions really make Hungary a country that you can visit all year round. It is a very safe country, but a large amount of tourists in the major cities does attract your typical pickpocketing and thieves and things like that. So if you are visiting, just be vigilant and treat it the way you would any other treat Budapest the way you would any other European city. Summer tends to attract larger crowds and higher prices, but the weather is beautiful in the spring and the fall. And this is what I think is the best time of the year to visit some of the other spots outside of Budapest, particularly Eger and Tojak. And while winter can be bitterly cold, the Christmas markets really make it a special experience to visit that time of year. Let's talk a little bit more about what makes Hungarian wine special and what we need to know about Hungarian wine for tonight. So Adele, tell us a little bit about Noble Rot. What is it and why does it make Tokaj in particular special?
So usually when I land in a new place, I definitely like to get a drink basically as soon as I land. I would say sometimes even just before you leave the airport, because it's vacation time, right? So when exploring a new place, I always like to, put my feet down and just like chill for a minute. And if you're gonna go to Hungary and you're gonna have a beverage, you're probably gonna be served local brandy, which is definitely what they're known for. It's called Palinka, and it's like a plum brandy, or something called Zwak, which is also kind of like a Jägermeister something. Yeah, you love it, no? Like
I still get flashbacks to college. No, thank you.
So beyond the brandies and the strange liqueurs, there's a sweet wine that Hungary is definitely known for, and it's called Tokaj. And this is a wine region and also kind of what we've now called the wine, even though there's several different producers who make Tokaj. And it is a very sweet dessert wine made from Botrytis grapes. And Botrytis it's a type of rot that only happens in certain conditions when the weather is just right. It happens in the region of Sauternes. It can also happen in Germany to make wines called like the Baron Auslese or the Trockenbeeren Auslese. And in Hungary in particular, it happens and when the berries raisinate so much and the rot is just very much so intermingled with everything, they call the berries azu. So in that picture you can see kind of the progression of when you make dry wines, to late harvest, to the more and more shriveled, and then the very most shriveled are called azu berries. And from those berries, you make Tokai. Tokai was, and actually in some places, the legend predates that of Sauternes, which is one of the most famous sweet wine regions in all of the world. There are several noble people from the past that have praised Tokai. Wines fit for the Pope. Let's see, King Louis XIV of France praised Tokai as the wine of kings and the king of wines. Catherine the Great of Russia enjoyed Tokai so much that she actually left one of her guards in Tokai permanently to guard her royal shipment. And then in the 19th century, Queen Victoria of England, she would always receive an annual birthday gift of a dozen bottles, courtesy of whichever Austro-Hungarian emperor that it was. So these wines have been enjoyed by the royals forever, but again, why aren't these wines here and highly regarded with such reputation as they used to? And that's because communism. And so now, since the 90s on, there is a resurgence of interest and just international money that's coming in and investments to sort of bring back these really good quality dessert wines and the nectar of the gods, if you will. So a lot of people around town, you can find Tokai usually in the dessert wine section, and it's served in like a 3-ounce pour. You really wouldn't sit down and have a whole bottle of Tokai. You would just have like a couple of sips. In fact, the highest level of Tokai, the most expensive version, is called Essentia. You can get a spoonful of Essentia for like $150. It's one of the most expensive spoonfuls of wine ever. I want to say that Pappas Steakhouse at one point was serving, you could get like, someone comes over with like this gold-plated spoon with a little bit of liquid, and okay, that'll be $150, please.
Well, at least they serve it in a gold-plated spoon.
There's a whole production to it. The only time I've ever tasted Essentia, one of the reps had gotten a bottle and it was taking it around the city, and I was the very last stop. But literally they had like a dropper, and you would get like 5 drops on your tongue, and that's what you got to taste because it's so expensive and so rare. But
sounds really special.
If you get a chance to go around town and you see Tokai on the menu, please try it. Pair it with any dessert that you're having. If you're having like a creme brulee or something like that, instead of going with a Sauternes, ask for something else that has botrytis, like the wines from Tokai. They're definitely worth they're definitely worth it. So, but after you've had a couple drinks in you, if you're walking around Budapest, don't forget to check into your hotel before you get lost.
Yes, so we have some wonderful hotels to check out while we're in Budapest. And one thing that's really awesome about these properties is just how centrally located they are and how they give you a different perspective on Budapest while you're there. The Four Seasons Hotel, Gresham Palace, is an icon within the city, and you're in really close walking distance to many of the major attractions, to lots of the main sites that you want to see while you're in town, and you have beautiful views. The hotel feels very classic, very traditional, and it's a true 5-star within the city. Then we also have the Kempinski Hotel, Corvinus, and this seems to be one of the favorite hotels of my clients who visit Budapest. It is located in a part of the city that's really known for its culinary experiences and for the restaurants nearby. So this is a place where you can walk out your door and you can get exploring some of the local places to eat, to drink, and to really enjoy yourself. Then the third hotel that I want to touch on is the Aria Hotel, not to be confused with the Aria in Las Vegas, but there is something interesting, and you're welcome to fact check me on this because I don't remember the details entirely, but I think the Aria Hotel in Budapest started the name, and then the hotel in Las Vegas actually worked something out with him. They're not affiliated with each other, but he just loved the name and the concept, and so there are some ties between the two. But the Aria Hotel in Budapest is a place for art lovers. They have a huge public-facing art collection that's viewable in the lobby and viewable in the hallways, and then each room has different artwork that makes them really stand out. And one hotel that I didn't mention in here, but I do want to say something about it because it is another 5-star within the city, is the Ritz-Carlton. And one thing that's really special about the Ritz-Carlton is if you stay in a suite there, they typically have a suite experience that includes a private driver who will take you around Budapest. So you can do a lot of sightseeing that's sort of included in that whole experience. So if you're short on time, you can really cover a lot of ground by taking advantage of that offer. And with that, let's talk a little bit about what else there is to do in Budapest. So let's imagine we're here for 2 nights. We've checked into our hotel. We'll start the day at Heroes Square. And this is locally known as Hosok Tere, and it's one of the city's lovely public plazas. From the square, you can visit the famous thermal bath. It's an easy walk. And then you can visit the Fisherman's Bastion and Gellert Hill for beautiful views of the city and the Danube. You can stop at Vajrahunyad Castle to be blown away by some world-class architecture, and then take a stroll along the Danube. Start at the Parliament building, walk along the stunning riverside path, snap photos every step of the way, and then end at St. Stephen's Basilica to watch the sunset from the tower. If you are a lover of nightlife, you can visit any of Budapest's ruins bars. So these are local dive bars that are actually in ruins. So it's a different take on the dive bar experience. But the most famous is called Zimpla Kurt. And if you can only visit one, this is the one to visit. Then from there, we're going to head to Lake Balaton. And this is a really easy day trip to take from Budapest. It's Central Europe's largest lake, and you can explore nearly 50 miles of shoreline. There are little beach towns along the lake's southern shore. You can visit Hevis Lake, which is the largest thermal lake in the world, and the extraordinary lake cave Tapolca. Balaton Uplands National Park is the perfect place to get some hiking in and soak up some natural beauty before returning to the city. Then on your 4th day, you can take a day trip out of town to the Danube Bend, and you can visit the photogenic Castle Visgrad with beautiful views of the rolling hills that fall into the river. Then from there, we will head to the ancient town of Pest. And this is at the foot of the Meshek Mountains. And you can stop by the cathedral, the mosque, and the buzzing medieval marketplace to explore the local area. Then your next day trip from Budapest is Holoko. And this is been voted as Hungary's most beautiful village, and it's hidden in a small mountain range in the country. And then on day 7, we'll take a day trip to Agtelek National Park. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a Hungarian treasure. It's a beautiful park that's committed to protecting biodiversity within the region. The main attraction is this unbelievable cave system. It includes the Baradla Cave, which is the largest cave in Hungary. And this breathtaking 15.5-mile long cave is the most impressive out of 270 which dominate the parks. Then, as we get ready to open up our wine today, Eger and Tokaj are where the last couple of places we'll visit as we explore Hungary. In Eger, you can roam the narrow streets, you can take in the old buildings, the Baroque architecture, and the famous castle before making your way to wine country. Then uncork your sweet, rich Tokaj in Hungary's oldest wine region. It's also a UNESCO heritage site, and learn about the history of it firsthand from some of the oldest vineyards in the world, and notice how it compares to some of the other dessert wines that you might be a little bit more familiar with. So with that, Adele, let's dive into our Tokai Sec tonight.
I've actually already poured myself so much. So we're in wine country. We took a day trip. It's the region of Tokai. It's in sort of the more like northern and eastern part of Hungary. And as much as we've been boasting about the great quality of sweet wines, they're just not something that people drink on the everyday basis. And I wanted to give you guys something that is drinkable now and before dinner, and it's still hot outside in Houston. So there is still wines and dry wines from Hungary that are very, very good. They're just off the beaten path, a little bit unheard of, and not the main style of wine that Hungary is known for. And this is one of them. This is from Királyivar. It uses the grape ferment, which is the same grape that they use to make the Yazoo grapes and to make the full-blown sweet style of Tokai. But this one's just harvested before the botrytis happens. So it's fully dry. This is a very cool project. It is, or it was established by an American. He was New York businessman who was actually born Filipino. His name's Anthony Huang, and he created this winery in 1997. Basically, he was visiting Budapest, was at a restaurant. One of the Psalms gave him a taste of Tokai, the sweet wine, and he was enamored with it and decided to basically do a day trip with his family out to the region to find out where these wines were made because he was so inspired by them. And a few months after his visit, being that New York businessman, he just purchased the estate. So for centuries before he purchased it, Királyivar actually supplied imperial wine to the Habsburgs, the influential royal house in Europe. So these wines are iconic. And then he decided to hire a very famous winemaker, and his name is very difficult to pronounce. It's Istvan is his first name, but he is the winemaker for Royal Tokai, and Royal Tokai is one of like the more famous sweet Tokai style producers. So you've got old school reputation, old school estate, new money, fantastic winemaker, but making dry white wines from the ferment grape. To me, it just sounds fantastic. The other thing that's interesting about this estate, they converted to all biodynamic viniculture, which is super duper important. They cleaned up the cellars, cleaned up all of the vines, and a lot of this, the owner, Anthony Huang, he learned because he also owns another property in France that's very famous. It's called Domaine Huet, and they're located in Vouvray in the Loire Valley, which is also biodynamic. So he learned all of these things and had all this knowledge, and was basically just like, we've got to do biodynamics everywhere because it makes the most sense to make delicious wines. So if you were to go and visit Királyivar, they have 6 main vineyards. Királyivar, sorry, I called it wrong. 6 main vineyards, and they're located right in the heart of Tokai, right on the hilltops that surround the villages of Mad and Brodeskurster. That's all I got on that one.
Yeah.
But all of these vineyards are historical and they're very important Grand Cru sites. So visiting them, if you're going to visit Tokai, is a must. The grapes that they grow here, they got ferments, they've got, which is the main grape, a little bit of a Harsavello and a small amount of another grape as well, but ferment definitely being the star here. This wine is the current release, and it's the 2016. It's got 4 years of age on it. If you see on the label, it says sec. Sec means dry. If you're looking for a Hungarian wine and it's still, and you don't want a dessert wine, sec, S-E-C. Remember those words because that will be an indicator that the wine is fermented to full dryness. This wine to me is absolutely delicious. It's slightly golden. Have you tasted it yet?
Not yet. That's really good to know though, because I always think of sec as an indication of sweetness, and it kind of varies from, or like semi-dryness. And so it's good to know that that is how to distinguish a dessert wine from one that's not. Adele, I know that you guys are actually getting ready to reopen this weekend. If any of our viewers came into the bar, would they be able to order a glass of Tokai dessert wine, or do you not have any
I do.
at the moment?
I have Royal Tokai on the menu. We are, and this is insider information, this is not official just yet. We're waiting on just a few more things, but unless the bar burns down and something happens major, we are on the right track of being approved for a restaurant license from TABC. So we will know for sure 100% by the end of day on Friday, and we will announce, and we'll be able to, and we're going to reopen for Sunday. So we're doing all the preparations right now to reopen for Sunday, and everything is going according to plan. So good news on this one, and you can definitely have a glass. And I've got a handful, maybe like 3 or 4 bottles left of this one as well. I haven't put it on the menu just yet because I wasn't sure if we'd sell all of them for this episode. But if you want to come and pick up any more, if you really like this wine, I personally love this wine. It's got everything that I like. It's mineral driven. It's got medium bodied. I definitely get, there's like a Meyer lemon, like candied Meyer lemon peel. There's green apple. And then there's a certain amount of just like a little bit of a smoke, or like you take 2 wet rocks and bang them together kind of minerality to it.
Yeah.
And just a little bit of like ginger spice, not like spicy red pepper or anything like that, but just like a little bit of like a ginger sweetness to it. Which reminds me, if you're going to pair this wine with something, Kristen and I were kind of banging our heads together on this one to do something that's not Asian, because we always tend to go towards Asian food because it's one of our favorites.
And let's face it, in like semi-quarantine block food, we're all eating a lot of takeout. It travels well.
Exactly. So if you did decide to get dumplings for dinner, or some sort of like mild, delicate Asian, this one would definitely pair as well. Or if you wanted to do something a little bit different, of course, white wine goes with fish, but there's some really cool, maybe like herb crusted fishes that you could do if you had like some sort of like a tarragon based sauce. I think that would really like help to elevate and lift some of the herbal and floral aromas in this wine. Kind of like the picture that we found, just like a nice seared herb crusted fish, a little bit of like a vinaigrette, and some sort of like a little mixed salad on the side would go great with that one. So we have one more country that we're going to go to, and I think Kristen has some very good news about possibly being able to travel there.
I do. So Serbia is one of the countries that is open to U.S. travelers. With that being said, there are some COVID requirements that are in place in order to enter. But if this is someplace that, if you need your European fix, this is one of the countries that you can visit. And Croatia and Montenegro are also countries you can visit. So there are ways to combine some destinations that we didn't talk about with this country that is available for American travelers to consider right now. So with that, a swig of fruit and a swig of fruit rakia and 3 kisses on the cheek are a sign of welcome in Serbia. And the Serbs don't do anything in moderation. So this is the perfect wine for us to end our Eastern European journey with. Whether it's après-ski, a night out on the town, or politics, everything is kind of full force ahead. It's one of Eastern Europe's most underrated destinations, and it's full of energy and spontaneity. And the Romans, Byzantines, Ottomans have all left their mark, and on the tall mountains and the rolling plains that really surround this country. Hikers dot the trails in the summer, and they turn into alpine ski slopes in the winter. You can explore hidden castles scattered through these fairy tale-like forests where folklore and legend are part of the culture. Belgrade is a hub for music, art, and literature. It's a place where Western and Eastern European cultures really meet. South Serbia has beautiful vineyards and winemaking practices that date back to the Roman Empire. While more commercial grapes are commonly grown, it's the age-old Prukopak and Tamžinnica varieties that are much sought after. There is another part of the country that's famous for its curative waters and hot springs, and it's known for its famous Bridge of Love. And and now that we've had an overview of Serbia as a destination, Adele, tell us a little bit about Serbian wine and the natural wine that comes from there, and why what we're drinking tonight is important.
So we wanted to go backwards because we wanted to have this wine last, because we do have a special guest who's going to come on, who we're going to announce in a little bit. But Serbian wine, this might be one of my first or second examples that I've ever had. And no wonder, because they're kind of going through this revolution of winemaking that started like 15 years ago, not a whole long time ago. And there's a handful of growers that are specializing in a certain part of Serbia, and they're doing all natural wines. As Kristen mentioned before, in the 3rd century AD, when Serbia belonged to the Roman Empire, this was the golden age of winemaking. This was like the main place where wine was excellent. And again, socialism happened, and we're still getting over that, right? So great wine was once made in Serbia. In fact, it was drunk and it was known to be good wine as far as Bordeaux. People in Bordeaux would drink Serbian wine. It was all over the place. But all of the villages, people just left after the collapse of Yugoslavia. So none of the traditions were carried on. So here we are trying to revitalize an industry that once made great wine, so logically it could be made again. Serbia has ancient winemaking traditions, but the natural wine movement is something that is, I think, the forward approach when it comes to making wine. There is a very thriving underground movement, and the hub of this movement is in the small winemaking part called Fruška Gora. I think that some people have this romantic idea that they're going to go to Chianti and they're going to just drive around and find this cute little winery and discover like the next hot thing. And I hate to break it to most people, but that's not going to happen, because all of the wines, for the most part, have been found and are represented or imported. Like, that's not going to be something that's going to be easy to do, or really realistically, it's not going to happen, because Italy is so, over-saturated the market with all sorts of small little producers. However, if you want to go wine hunting, this is the place that you should go. Serbia, but specifically Fruška Gora. There's a handful of producers. They're making natural wines, and there are gems that are just like waiting to be undiscovered. Some of really good quality wines. Most of them are white. Some of them are the reds. Are kind of taking a little bit longer, but the white wines are definitely showing the most promise. And like our special guest, his name is Grant, who's coming on in just a few minutes here, is an importer who's seen this, started his own company like within this past year, and is importing interesting natural wines, one of which from Serbia, which is super cool. So brief explanation of natural wine. Why is it so cool? All the cool kids are drinking it. It's Instagram worthy, but there's no official definition of what natural wine is. There's no rules or laws of what it has to be, but it's basically when you take this approach to winemaking, and also how you treat your vines and how you treat the wines after when they're aging in the cellar, that is very hands-off. Of course, biodynamic and organic in the vineyards, 100% sustainable farming processes, but also the wines have to be bottled, unfiltered, and unfined. So they're going to be cloudy. There's going to be sediment, or as we call snacks, in the bottom of the bottle. And no new oak is used. And they try to make as hands-off, just throw it in, do its own thing, native yeasts, and make wine. It's delicious, but it is high risk to make these wines and also make them still stable and good. And so crafting these wines without this intervention of technology and labor and stuff like that means that a lot of the winemakers will resort to hand picking, foot crushing, basket pressing, like the old school ways, no electricity or power or anything like that. But because of that, sometimes the wines are hard to find, and they're only made in small quantities as well.
That's really interesting. And I think, well, first of all, I love the term wine hunting. So that's something that is a true sightseeing experience in Serbia. Just like you would go hunting here in Texas, you hunt for your wines here in Serbia, and you can find some really special and really unique kinds of things. And if anybody has opened the Serbian wine for tonight, this might be your first introduction to orange wine. And I want to keep things moving because I'm super excited to introduce Grant to tell us a little bit more about where we're going tonight. But let's check in to our hotel in Belgrade. So,
and Belgrade, yeah. Belgrade is only an hour, this region of Fruška Gora is only an hour outside of Belgrade. So
and excuse me. And that's something that I think is really cool, where, like I kind of said at the beginning of this, all of these major cities, whether it's Ljubljana, Budapest, or Belgrade, you can base yourself from these cities and visit these wine regions and these other places. So if you had 10 days to travel, you could do 5, 4, 4, or that doesn't add up. You could do 4, 3, 3, or something like that to have a day in the city, a day in wine country, and a day being active, and really kind of get this all-encompassing experience there. But let's talk about the hotels that we're checking into in Belgrade. So if you want a true 5-star experience, you have Square 9. And this was born out of a desire to be part of Belgrade's post-war renewal. It is super committed to the city's long history. It's a dynamic hub of creativity and design, and it is a more personal and original hotel concept to a city that over the last few decades has only added very few international chains. This property overlooks the trendy Dorkol neighborhood. It's one of Belgrade's oldest neighborhoods, and it's in walking distance to many of the popular sites. Then we have the St. 10, and this is a small luxury hotel. It offers this heavenly comfort among these stately boulevards and with sweeping views of the Rakar neighborhood. It was built in 1929 by a famous architect, Stojan Veljkovic, and this landmark building kind of swirled into political intrigue during the Cold War. Today, its historic facade merges seamlessly with its more contemporary side, and it's really come into its own as a luxury boutique hotel. Then the last, and many of the sites are just in really easy walking distance. Then our last hotel is the Mama, the Mama Shelter Belgrade. And this is definitely a more funky hotel. It's a little bit younger. It's really representative of the city's kind of emerging nightlife scene, and kind of embodies that sense of excess. It's a lot more low key and compared to the other two hotels. So if you're somebody who really enjoys a good time and likes to see the city after dark, this is the place for you to stay. And with that, let's welcome today's guest, our Eastern European wine and destination expert, Grant Richardson. So Grant, I would like to invite you to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's dive into Serbia as a destination, and then talk about your wine.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay, Kristen?
We can. Thank you.
Great. So my name's Grant. I started my importing business, Pangea Selections, back in 2019. It's funny to hear Adele talk about wine hunting, because that's literally what I was doing. And I had such a great time and found some stuff I was so interested in that I thought maybe I can be more than just a connoisseur and actually do this. And so that's kind of how my career started in importing. Around the same time, there was some international trade disputes going on that resulted in 25% tariffs on a lot of wines coming from Western Europe. So it really just out of necessity, I started looking at wines from Eastern Europe. And went over there, went on a buying trip throughout Serbia, Bulgaria, and Albania. and really just fell in love with the regions, with a lot of the creativity and just kind of the attitude of Renaissance that a lot of people have with winemaking there, because of that common theme of overcoming post-communism that we've been talking about tonight. Yeah, so I guess that's just a brief background. We'll dive into a little bit of what an itinerary into Serbia might look like. Again, it's a relatively small country, so basing yourself out of Belgrade makes the most sense, kind of like what we talked about for Budapest and Hungary, and Ljubljana. That one always trips me up, for Slovenia as well. Belgrade is a really energetic city. Like when you fly in, you see just these kind of row after row after row of post-Soviet communist block apartments in like the brutalist style, and it's a little intimidating at first. But as you get in your car and you drive to the city center, you start to see this really strong influence of Art Nouveau and these kind of Habsburg era buildings that are reminiscent of more like Austria and Hungary. And so it's just this really cool culture combination. And then you also see just the history of the area too, where you've had the influence from the Romans and the influence from the Ottomans, and just kind of the infighting with all the different ethno groups throughout the Balkans together. And it just has this almost tension about it that's just kind of alive in the energy in the city. So the Orthodox Church is the primary organization in kind of like a religious aspect there. So there's a lot of beautiful cathedrals, including St. Sava, probably the most noteworthy in the city. And then also the Royal Palace complex is definitely something from kind of the historical standpoint that people would want to check out. The Old Town is where I probably spent my most time in Belgrade. It has just this era almost of like a more gritty version of Paris, but your dollar's going to go so much further. Like beautiful pedestrian boulevards with a strong cafe culture, but really kind of like chic bars too. A lot of young people out all hours of the night drinking and hanging out. So moving on from Belgrade, just outside.
Grant, let me jump in real quick. You mentioned the Old Town and how you spent a lot of your time in there. Do you have any favorite restaurants or favorite bars or places that you found that you felt like really kind of embodied Belgrade and embodied like the experience when you visit the city?
Yeah, I wish I could give you a name off the top of my head, but most of them are Serbian, which mine is developing. I can send you some names after the presentation if you'd want to share.
Yeah,
them.
definitely. We'd love to be able to share those with everyone and give them a little, especially as a destination that we could actually possibly visit in the near future. It would be great to have just some ideas on places that somebody who spent time there really enjoys, especially if you are into wine.
Totally. And it's a great destination too, in the fact that I'm not a 5-star traveler. I don't eat at a ton of Michelin star restaurants, but it's so great in Belgrade that you can really have those experiences at a fraction of the price that you'd be paying in Western Europe. And it's not a replication of what you would get in France. It's very authentic Serbian at the same time, which is always refreshing.
I love that. So what are some of your favorite places to visit outside of Belgrade? We've touched on a few of the day trips here, but I want to hear more about your experiences and what you think really stands out for somebody on their first trip to Serbia.
Sure. Yeah. So in your notes, you have Vinča, which is the famous archaeological site just out of town, which is definitely worth seeing. It kind of is a testament to why this area has been so culturally significant for such a long time, and that this old civilization has been there for so long, right at the combination of the Danube and the Sava rivers. Vallejo is also another area that has received a lot of international attention just for when the vibe of Belgrade is just a little too intense. The Vallejo is a little bit more of a small town vibe. I haven't spent time there, but it's something that most of the international tourists do tend to make it out there.
That's really
the
cool.
region I am with, yeah, it's a really neat area. I'm most familiar with Fruška Gora. It's this region. It's about a 45-minute car ride outside of Belgrade, and it's this extinct volcanic ridge that runs for about 50 miles along the Danube River. So north central Serbia is kind of flat, and it looks almost like the drive to Waco from Austin, at least. And then you just see this beautiful mountain ridge just appear out of nowhere. And it is kind of the home base for a lot of the more experimental winemakers that we were talking about. It's a national park as well, so it's cool that you have this beautiful kind of hillside with hiking and the vineyards all mixed in together. And then there's a couple really beautiful small towns in the area. Sremski Karlovici, if I'm getting my pronunciation right, is one of them. And then Novi Sad is there as well. A little bit more of the kind of like Hungarian style architecture.
Yeah, I know Novi Sad. I know that one.
Okay.
Very cool.
It's the one we can pronounce, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's probably why I know it. Well, tell us a little bit more about this region and about the wine that we're drinking together today.
Sure. So this wine is from a producer called Bakizgi Winery. So it is called Uncensored 2017. It's out of a grape called Traminer. So it's the parent grape to Gewürztraminer, which we're probably all a little bit more familiar with. And then it's also, I believe, the same grape as Sauvignon from the Jura.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's one that the grape just kind of moved westward, and I don't know if it actually mutated or if it's the exact same genetics behind it, but it's one of those where there's a little bit of a murky history to it.
Interesting. And so what was it about this wine that really stood out to you, and why did you choose to bring it in? Tell us a little bit more about it. Let's dive into it.
Sure. So I am a huge fanatic for orange wines. And for those of you who might be new to orange wine, just a little context about it. So typically when we make a red wine, we crush up the red grapes, we let them hang out with the skins for a while, and then we pump it off and age it. When you do a rosé, you just age this, that skin contact is just for a real short time. For white grapes, typically we're just crushing it and then pressing it immediately off. So an orange wine is when you make a white wine like a red wine. So you let the grape skins hang out with that white wine for a long time, and it picks up some of that orange color. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. You get some of that kind of freshness and like floral qualities of a white wine, but a little bit of that kind of like tannic grippiness that you get from a red wine. So it's a group that I've been really attracted to. And I found this one just to be a really nice balance of some of those kind of like floral and spicy aromas that you get from like a Gewürztraminer or just any of those Traminer grapes. But then it balances with that tannin really nicely. So yeah, this is just a producer that I was really fascinated with his entire lineup. He works with some of the more international varieties like Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir, as well as some of the more indigenous varieties that we talked about like Prokupak, Tamjanika, and then Traminer, I guess, is a little bit more unique to Eastern Europe as well.
And he has a pretty cool backstory, right? Adele was telling me a little bit about him. I think his name is Georgia, and he was a DJ.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's funny. His name it's like George, but like you put the emphasis on the end instead of the beginning. George. Exactly.
George.
Yeah. So he was a DJ for like 10 years in Belgrade. Just kind of, we talked about the nightlife, that it's a fun place to be. So he was very much in that scene, and his family had about 15 acres of vineyards up in this Fruška Gora region. And they were just selling the wine to the local cooperative, or selling the grapes, to the local cooperative, just to make some pretty uninspiring wine and just turn a small profit off the grapes. So Georgia took kind of control of that and didn't really like seeing that done with this beautiful landscape that they had. So he took control of the vineyards. He converted it to organic production. Just this last year, he switched over to biodynamic production as well, and then started making his own wine.
That's super cool. And I think you shared a really interesting recipe with us. That's a really unique food pairing to go with this wine. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the Serbians are all about meat. They love serving huge grilled plates of meat. And so I think that it is a perfect combination to have like a kind of typical fried schnitzel type dish with this sort of wine. I think the acid and the tannin in the wine really balance out something that has a little bit of like fried food stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a traditional Serbian schnitzel. I can't honestly say that I've cooked a whole lot of Serbian food, but I just thought it was really interesting pairing with the two. So I think this one is basically a cutlet. I think they use pork a lot of the time. and then you just pound it, and I think we put like a cream cheese is basically the closest ingredient we would have here on the inside. Wrap it up, make a little like egg wash batter to go on the outside, and heat it in nonstick pan and take it to town.
So Grant, if I want to open up the floor. We have gone over tonight, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I want to give all of our viewers the chance to ask you questions. So if you have any questions for Grant, type them in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself. But Grant, while people are getting comfortable with asking you things, tell us what you would say your top 3 experiences are for a first-time visit to Serbia.
I would definitely say visiting Fruška Gora. I think it's just one of the most, from a nature perspective, just one of the most beautiful areas I've seen in Eastern Europe. And again, just that combination of hiking and wine tasting all in one day, I think is something that's really unique and special. I'd say spending plenty of time just in the old town in Belgrade. Again, I'm not a big shopper, but it was just a great selection of just really quality goods that were kind of unique and things that I hadn't seen before, and ended up going home with a lot of clothes, a lot of art, something that is unusual for me. So that was just a really fun shopping destination, which is something that I will very rarely say.
Very cool. And last one.
Yeah, I think just, again, the cultural side of it, going down to, sorry, I have to look at my pronunciation again, but Vishna, the archaeological sites, I think are pretty special to see something that ancient alongside something so kind of modern in this big, huge city.
Yeah, that's super awesome. So guys, if you do have any questions for Grant, please feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. Or you can type it in the chat box if you don't feel comfortable speaking.
My question that I have about the region and people who might be wine hunting or anything like that, or how you met the winemaker for this wine. Did you have to make an appointment? Are there tasting rooms? Do you just knock on someone's door? What's the best course of action?
It's definitely, it depends answer. So a lot of the smaller production facilities don't necessarily or aren't set up for like a tasting room type experience that we might be accustomed to. So you definitely have to be the type of traveler who's willing to have a conversation on the phone with the winemaker that might be in broken English and drive down that dirt road that looks a little sketchy in your rental car. But everyone there is super hospitable. They're very excited that you would have come all this way to try their wines, and they will totally open the cellar door and pour for you and let you taste out of the barrels. I've had some pretty special experiences where people are willing to give you some opportunities that you might not have had in a more large scale or more traditional type winery.
So question here, Grant, Kristen, kind of combo here. So first off, Grant, thanks for joining, and Kristen always, and Adele, thanks for hosting. I've been apart for a couple of weeks, so it's always great to see some friendly faces. So looking at some travel options, right? So Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina all have, they're connected country-wise, border-wise. They all have open tourism to U.S. with the PCR test negative within 48 hours. So even if you're in country, you've got to do some testing while you're there. So how would you recommend kind of stitching and connecting those four together from a travel standpoint, Kristen, from a wine standpoint, Grant, and Adele, jump in on the wine question. Once you get beyond that, right, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria aren't open right now with the same level of flexibility, but those four are, and they're all, they're all connected.
So I think, so everything is kind of evolving. And the short answer is I would have to do more research to answer the specific intricacies when it comes to crossing borders. My kind of general statement is for people who do want to travel right now is pick one country, unless you have a lot of time. Because I think if you do arrive in Croatia and you have a negative PCR test, and I think it might be 72 hours before arrival, but once you get there, if you're there for over 2 weeks, then your visa has started. And once you're there, you might be able to cross borders as an American, even to countries that aren't open to Americans, if you've been in Europe for 2+ weeks, because that kind of takes into account the bigger quarantine restrictions in place. And this is what I've heard from Americans I know who kind of got stuck there in Europe on a tourist visa. But my short answer would be pick one country in a post-pandemic world. Unless it's something you have an extended period of time to kind of really consider and do more of a slow travel thing over a couple of months, then we might be able to figure it out, but there's not a quick fix kind of way to do it or answer, because you could run into having to get tests while you're traveling.
Yeah, so I was kind of assuming that I'll need to get tests while I'm traveling, right? And so think, sub 2 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get through, 3 places in 12 days-ish, right? Assuming that I'll have to get testing while I'm in country.
Yeah.
Then how would you, like, putting those aside, like, in a happy path, like that's not a logistical issue to solve for, then how would you recommend pulling the kind of the wine side of that together if you had, a little less than 2 weeks to get it all in?
Yeah, I think, I think if you've never been to Croatia, you'll probably want to spend at least a week there, probably 2 to 3 nights in Montenegro, then move into, then combine Bosnia and Serbia for another 6 days, 5 days. You could kind of I guess you could shave off like a couple of days in Croatia if you just wanted to do like kind of start in the north, do some of the wine country there, then hop down. That would be kind of in a non-COVID world, a way to kind of combine those countries. Grant, do you have anything to add? Do you have anything from your experience traveling there pretty recently? Do you have any feedback?
Sure. So I was there, I think, the week before, like I left like March 2nd. So I got back just before all this started. But the one thing I would add to that too is that in that kind of Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia area, you're having to hop around the EU border as well too.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you might be able to zip right on through, but other times that can be a little bit of a pain. In terms of just the wine regions, Croatia and Serbia are very compatible and doable with each other. I'm less familiar with Bosnia and kind of the further north you go. But I think that they, in a non-COVID world, are totally something that you could piggyback off each other. But again, the last few months, it makes everything a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, for sure. Eric, does that kind of answer your question?
It does. Yeah,
Okay.
no, it absolutely does. Very helpful. Thanks.
So I actually do have one of my destination partners who will be joining us in more detail next week is joining us tonight. And she said she actually did have some clients recently who did 2 weeks in Serbia and then they went on to France without any problem. So if you did have a longer time to spend in a country, you could move a little bit more easily once you kind of got those initial 2 weeks knocked out.
Great to know.
Yeah. And guys, my cursor has disappeared, so I'm kind of like moving it around and trying to figure out how to like stop the share so I can see everybody's faces, and it is not working in my favor. So if anybody does have any questions, please jump in. And otherwise, if you got our last email, we have a bunch of new things going on. We are on Instagram, we have a Patreon page, and we're now on YouTube. And our first episode will be launching this Friday at 4 p.m. It's revisiting the New York's Finger Lakes region, and we'll have recorded episodes from our previous Talk, Taste, and Travel shows dropping every Monday and Friday at 4 p.m. I will shoot y'all an email this Friday with some updates from Lionhound and 13 Celsius before the weekend, and remind you guys to revisit and subscribe to our page. But next week, we are headed to Georgia and to Armenia. And we are super excited to have a destination expert from Georgia joining us and a wine expert from Armenia. So we will have lots of exciting content to cover and to share with you guys. And hopefully over the weekend, we'll get some updates about what's happening at 13 Celsius. And Adele and I have been discussing ways to bring Talk, Taste, and Travel to y'all in person safely in the future as well. So stay tuned. Thank you, guys.